So I did some research on case by using case study before. But I must say that going back to looking at the methodology itself and understand better how it is and how to use it is such a big benefit for me. So I would like to share with you as well what I have learned from this learning experience. Many scholars still have this stereotype thinking case study is a research method that can be only suitable in the preliminary research stage to explore the research topic at large. But this is a misconception. So today's presentation will walk you through several publications using case study as a method, not only for exploring, but also for describing and explaining contemporary phenomena in our real life. So the textbook I was reading is authored by Robert Ing. He's a very, very famous advocate of case study as a research methodology. And most contents of this presentation is based on my reading through this book. So I have also attached one copy of this book in our group sharing folder on Google Drive. You can look for it. I pasted the link to access the folder in Slack this morning. So if you cannot find it, you can private message me later. I will send you directly. What you see here is basically a table of contents of this book. It's a very complex methodology to introduce in just a short presentation. So I'm thinking about breaking it into in total 5 sharing events. So the first event will only cover the first and second chapter of this book. And in the upcoming 4 events, I will introduce in each event one chapter of the following part of the book. So let's see the next. Here is the linear, but also iterative. That means it can go backward and forward somehow in the way. So today's sharing will be focusing on plan and design of case study research, and I will leave the remaining 4 circles, 4 stages, to the remaining 4 events. So let's move to the first half of the presentation. I will share with you what is case study, so the definition, and what concerns arise to use this methodology, and how to decide when to use it instead of using other methods, and 3 categories or types of a case study based on the different research purposes. That will be the 4 main aspects of the first half of the presentation. So what is case study? So the book that I was reading, it has been repeatedly published. Now it's reached 6th edition. So Robert Ing, over years, he modified the definition of case study. But in an earlier version, he said case study is as an empirical inquiry that investigates a contemporary phenomena with its real life context when the boundaries between phenomena and context are not clearly evident, and in which multiple sources of evidence are used. So I underlined 4 very key points of this definition: contemporary phenomena, real life context, boundaries, and multiple sources of evidence. They are all very key points of the case study research method. And later, so the edition I am reading at present was published in 2018. That's the latest version, also the 6th edition of the book. He actually updated the the definition to what he called twofold definition. So as you can see from the highlight of this content, all other 4 aspects still mentioned, but added 2 aspects more. So one is to cope with the technical distinctive situation in which there will be many more variables of interest than data points. And as one result, benefits from the prior development of theoretical propositions to guide the design, data collection, and analysis. So what it means? It means that, case study, for instance, unlike survey design, survey, for instance, they already have some idea or mind what to look into, right? So they design the questionnaire and distribute it, but that can easily miss other points, other data points, or other variables of interest in the sample. So one point of case study is the author has the opportunity to immerse into the real life context to get all those in-depth detail of the whole picture. So what's the other aspects meaning? That means quite often also case study needs some theoretical foundation to guide the research design. It's not like I just jump into this sample without any prior research into the topic. Often they also use theoretical foundation or propositions. If you like calling it maybe hypothesis that they got from the previous research or observations. So there are some well-known concerns when it comes to using case study. First concern comes from bad influence or impression resulted from 2 main communities. So one, there are 2 types of case study if you consider the research or non-research aspect. So in the research community, when case study was used, usually not always like that, but there is indeed a big amount of literature writing. They're using very sloppy research practice, not quite reflect the real case study approach, depth or complexity. Another bad influence is from the non-research case study practice. So over years, case study, you can find them being five case studies being mentioned on, for instance, mass media, newspaper, some reports. They all claim that they use case study, but in fact, in this different kind of reports or writings or public media kind of materials, they didn't follow the very demanding actually research process that is required in doing case study. So all these 2 aspects combined together create a bad image of using case study. People will think, this is sloppy, right? This is not that strict. This is not that scientific. So that's one side. And another 3 reasons, including, for instance, people doubt the generalizability of results that is coming from case study research. So for instance, if you just study 1 case or 2 cases, how can you ensure the result can be applied to bigger audience, right? So that's a downfall to many scholars. And another concern is usually when you deal with case study data, it's a very big amount of qualitative data, and people feel, well, that needs manpower, that needs resources. I may not have that kind of resources and manpower at hand. So the final concern comes from when compared with other research methods. What is the comparative advantage of using case study? So that is not quite clear for some researchers as well. So all these concerns arise and people feel a little bit hesitant to use case study or unclear about using case study when it comes to the decision of choosing methods from the pool. So even though case study faces this kind of different arguments or conflicts among scholars, but it still gained wide recognition in many social science studies. As you can see from the table on the right, there are many fields that are currently applying case study as a method to study their topics. That includes, for instance, political science, psychology, education, healthcare. So we have some healthcare students in the group, and you can also find a lot of case studies in the clinical research about different cases being reported. And in the next part of the presentation, I will use 3 stories happened in different time of the history, and also involved 3 different publications that are very well cited by community and by the well known by the audience, the public as well. So when it comes to types of case studies, there, if you explain it from the research purposes, there are 3 types. So one is explorative, one is exploratory, so to explain, and the third one is descriptive, so to describe. And I attach each of them to one story, and I'm gonna introduce it in detail now. So the first one is Dutch corruption that happened between 2000 and 2003. Well, at least that's the data where it was registered. So if you look at the corruption perceptions index reported in 2017, you can see that a lot of corruptions in fact happen in developing countries, right? So for the advanced or more economically developed countries, it's less serious. So a lot of attention got diverted to low-income countries to study about corruption. That led to a research gap saying not much is known about the corruption situation or why there's such corruption in high-income countries. So there was this study paying attention to this gap. So their research question was, what is the nature of corruption in Western democracies? Or you can say, how do officials get corrupted in Western democracies? So what the authors did was they studied 10 Dutch corruption cases registered, and they study in depth, case by case, by looking at the confidential criminal files registered between 2000 and 2003. So these 2 authors did this research in 2008, and why they decided to use case study. So as you can see from the highlight, this is explorative research. They don't know why, so they have to explore, right? And they use multiple case study. This method is fitting when not much is known about the phenomenon that is being researched, or when the phenomenon is so complex that neither the variables nor the exact relationship between the variables is fully definable. So totally very, very explorative when not much is known, as you can see. And these are the main research outputs of this study. There are in total 9 propositions reported by this study, telling you different levels and containing individual level why, organizational level why. When it comes to relationship with other people, how it influences an official's decision to be corruption, how the slope is very slippery for officials to get gradually corrupted. So all these propositions, they serve to be future research direction to be tested, verified, proved by either further case studies or other research methods. So as indicated by Robert Ng, he said exploratory case study is a means to define the necessary questions and hypotheses for developing consecutive studies. So as you can see, they cast a wider net into the ocean and try to catch what fish that are worth of attention for further studies. They need to tell you what deserve your further research questions, exploration, or what kind of hypothesis or propositions deserve your attention for further research. So the second case happened in 1962 when leaders of the US and the Soviet Union engaged in an intense 13-day political military standoff over the installation of nuclear-armed Soviet missiles on Cuba. So that was very, very close to US shores. And this was like the closest encounter, very, very close to initiate a nuclear war in the world. So this is a very critical historical moment. It didn't happen in the end to initiate that, but it was very close. So this case is very, very intense, and two scholars from Harvard University got appointed later, only 9 years later after the encounters. So these two scholars from Harvard University, they started investigating the case. And that led to a very, very popular political science bestseller called Essence of Decision. So that is 277-page insightful book based on this 13-day seminal single event, single case. And this is a masterpiece of explanatory single case study because they actually use 3 models to address 3 research questions. So 3 models are the US and the Soviet Unions, they perform as either rational actors, that's model 1, or as complex bureaucracies, that's model 2, or as politically motivated groups of persons, that's model 3. And they want to use these 3 models to explain why did the Soviet Union decide to place offensive missiles in Cuba? Why did US respond to the deployment with a blockade? Why did the Soviet Union withdraw the missiles in the end? So that's the second case. And the third case was happening in 1976. And this is very, very interesting as a comparison to nowadays global epidemic, example happening in the world. Because in 1976, there was a widespreading swine flu in the US. And unlike the government being not very well responding to this pandemic we're facing at the moment, the government back then in US, they kind of overreacted. They overreacted and led to 1/4 of population of USA got vaccinated in a short period. But later it proved that the vaccine actually has had some negative effect, and that might lead to people's different problems, and it got retrieved very fast later. So that's a typical case of overreaction of government towards the public health problem. And this is famous descriptive case study. And the 2 scholars got assigned to write a report on the matter for National Research Council in the USA. Later, this report also got further elaborated by these 2 authors into a very influential book named The Epidemic That Never Was. And that book was published in 1983. So as I said, 1/4 of Americans got vaccinated. That was like 40 million Americans got affected by this political decision. So this book and this report, they were so influential, so convincing. Contemporary policymakers still consulted to understand how to better respond to health crisis and public actions in light of new threats by flu epidemics. I don't know if they still read it, no. Based on the situation we see now, it's not quite. Well, the research questions they use in this report. So how top lay officials, especially when that knowledge, their knowledge is not very focused on this certain aspect, how they can actually deal with the situation. More scientifically, more evidence-based, something like that. And how should policymakers seek to involve and to educate the public and relevant parties on such complicated and technical issues? So as we can see from these 3 cases, 3 publications, let's summarize the 3 types of case study research. So as I read to you before, the research questions used by case studies, usually they tackle how or why, this type research questions. And they intense focus on single phenomenon. So either corruption, either an epidemic thing, or the missile encounters, deployment, right? So there are 3 types, as I said. So the descriptive type is that case studies describe interventions or processes. Okay, that's to describe. And explorative is to explore situations where there's no single outcome. And explanatory is to explain causal relationships. So as you can see, it can be applied into different stages of the research as well.